Hi, friend. Tonight we begin with the gleaming, heroic, absolutely miserable world of medieval knights. Those shining symbols of chivalry who charged into battle on magnificent steeds, defended honor, and rescued damsels. Turns out, being a knight was less about glory and more about slowly cooking inside a metal oven while your horse tried to bankrupt you. If you're new here, or if you've been here since the beginning and I just don't remember because it's late and I've had too much coffee, I really appreciate you giving this a shot. If it works for you, great. And if this becomes your new favorite way to fall asleep or stay awake, that's on me. I'm just here to help you fall asleep or stay awake. So get comfortable and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Congratulations! You've just been born into minor nobility in the year 1250. The good news is you're not a peasant. The bad news is you're about to spend the next 15 years of your life training to become a heavily armored rich kid with a death wish. Because that's what a knight really was, not the Hollywood hero on a white stallion. More like an over-equipped trust fund kid carrying a 7-year-old child on his back while trying not to pass out from heat stroke. Let's be clear about something up front. Everything you think you know about knights is wrong. The movies lied to you, the romance novels lied to you, even the Renaissance paintings lied to you, because they were painted 200 years after the fact by artists who had never seen actual combat. The reality? Knights were walking through financial disasters wrapped in metal coffins, maintained by a small army of servants, bankrupted by livestock that ate better than peasants, and constantly one bad joust away from spending the rest of their lives drinking soup through a straw. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Let's start at the beginning. When you're 7 years old and someone decides your childhood is over. If you were born into a knightly family, your training started young. Not teenager young. 7 years old. The medieval version of being shipped off to military boarding school, except the headmaster was a battle-scarred lord who considered compassion a character flaw. You became a page. Congratulations. Your job was to serve, learn, and try not to cry where anyone could see you. You learned to ride horses before you could do basic math. You learned to handle weapons before you learned to read. And you learned that nobility meant suffering in silence, which was medieval speak for, stop complaining or I'll make you run laps in the courtyard until you vomit. The training was brutal by design. You weren't just learning skills. You were being broken down and rebuilt into someone who could function while wearing 60 pounds of metal in the middle of summer while other men tried to cave your skull in with hammers. No child psychology, no positive reinforcement, no participation trophies. Just a wooden sword, a bruised body, and the constant reminder that weakness got you killed. Your instructors hit you with practice weapons that left real bruises. They knocked you off horses, they made you carry heavy loads until your legs shook. Character building, definitely. By age 14, you graduated to squire status. Must be nice. Now you got to follow an actual knight around, which meant you were part servant, part student, part pack mule. You carried his weapons, you maintained his armor, you held his horse. You helped him dress, which was like helping someone put on a car before breakfast. And you kept training. Sword work, lance work, wrestling, grappling, horseback riding until your thighs were raw and bleeding. The medieval version of CrossFit, except instead of posting about it on Instagram, you just limped around the castle and tried not to make eye contact with anyone. The goal was to make all of this automatic, to train your body so thoroughly that when someone was trying to kill you, you didn't have to think, you just reacted. Like muscle memory, except the muscles in question had been beaten into submission over a decade of systematic abuse. And then, if you survived all of that, if you didn't die from training injuries or get trampled by a horse or catch some medieval plague, you might get knighted around age 21. Congratulations, you are now qualified to die in full plate armor. Let's talk about armor, because this is where the fantasy really crashes into reality. Hollywood shows you knights moving like Olympic athletes, doing backflips in full plate, running up stairs, fighting for hours without breaking a sweat. Good luck with that. A full suit of plate armor weighed between 50 and 70 pounds. That doesn't sound terrible, right? People carry heavy backpacks, soldiers carry gear. How bad could it be? Except imagine carrying that 7-year-old child we mentioned. Now imagine that child is strapped to every part of your body. Your chest, your back, your arms, your legs, your head. And that child never shifts their weight or adjusts position. They just hang there, pressing down on you, restricting your movement, making every action require twice the effort. That's armor. The weight distribution was better than a backpack, true, but it was still 60 pounds of metal that you had to move with every step, every swing of your sword, every time you tried to stand up after being knocked down. And here's the thing nobody tells you. The armor didn't just restrict your movement, it restricted your breathing. The chest plate pressed against your ribs. The helmet limited how much air you could pull in. So you're trying to fight, trying to survive, and you can only take about 70% of a normal breath. Like trying to sprint while breathing through a coffee stirrer. Not ideal. Knights in battle didn't fight for hours. They fought in short, brutal bursts, then needed to rest because they were literally suffocating inside their own protection. The medieval version of getting winded walking upstairs, except people were trying to kill you the whole time. Combat typically lasted minutes, not hours, because after about 10 minutes of actual fighting in full armor, you weren't a warrior anymore. You were a sweaty, gasping, oxygen-deprived rich person in a very expensive metal suit trying not to pass out. And if you fell down, getting back up was its own battle. You couldn't just hop to your feet. You had to roll, find leverage, push yourself up with your hands while 60 pounds of armor tried to keep you pinned like a turtle on its back. Some knights carried special hammers just for this purpose, not to fight enemies, to help other knights get back up. The medieval version of roadside assistance, except the road was a battlefield and everyone was trying to murder you. But the weight was just the beginning of your armor problems. The cost was catastrophic. A full suit of plate armor cost roughly the same as a luxury car today. We're talking $30,000 to $50,000 in modern money for metal clothes that you might only wear a few times before they became obsolete, or you grew out of them, or they got damaged beyond repair. No payment plans, no financing options, no 0% APR for qualified buyers. You paid up front in silver to an armorer who would spend months custom fitting every piece to your body. Because armor wasn't one size fits all. It had to fit perfectly, or it would catch on itself, pinch, chafe, and turn you into an easy target. And that was just the armor. You also needed the arming clothes underneath. Multiple layers of padded fabric to prevent the metal from rubbing your skin raw. Think of it as medieval compression wear, except it was made of linen stuffed with horsehair and smelled like a gym bag that had been left in a sauna for 3 months. Then there was the helmet, another small fortune. The great helm, the bassinet, the sallet, whatever your era and preference demanded. Each one cost thousands in modern money. Each one turned your head into a metal box with limited visibility and even more limited airflow. Some knights owned multiple suits of armor, tournament armor, battle armor, parade armor, like owning different cars for different occasions, except each car costs as much as a house and could get you killed if you wore the wrong one to the wrong event. The financial pressure was immense. You inherited some of this stuff, sure, but armor technology changed. What protected your grandfather was outdated by the time you came of age, so you had to buy new, better, more expensive. And if you couldn't afford the best armor, you wore what you could get. Secondhand plate, borrowed pieces, a mix of chainmail and partial plate that left gaps. The medieval version of driving a beater car to work, except your coworkers all had Teslas and your beater might get you killed in the company parking lot. Many knights went into debt just to maintain the appearance of wealth and status, because a knight without proper armor wasn't respected, wasn't feared, wasn't taken seriously. You had to look the part, even if it bankrupted you. Spoiler alert, it usually did. Let's say you've got the armor. You've spent a small fortune. The pieces are sitting in your chamber, gleaming and beautiful, and absolutely terrifying because you have to put them on. Getting into armor was not a solo activity. You couldn't do it yourself, physically impossible. The pieces buckled and strapped in places you couldn't reach. The medieval version of trying to zip up a dress with the zipper in the back, except the dress weighed 60 pounds and was made of metal plates that could pinch your skin off if you weren't careful. You needed help. Usually your squire, sometimes two squires. They dressed you like a very aggressive doll, piece by piece, layer by layer, until you were encased in metal from neck to toe. First came the arming doublet, padded clothing that went under everything. Then the leg armor, greaves for your shins, cuisses for your thighs, polines for your knees. Each piece strapped on, buckled tight, adjusted until it sat correctly. Then your feet, sabatons, metal shoes that turned your feet into clubs. No flexibility, no feeling, just metal covering meat, hoping you didn't trip over something. Then the chest piece, the breastplate in front, the backplate behind, connecting at the sides with straps and buckles that your squire fumbled with while you stood there, sweating, already regretting every choice that led to this moment. Arm armor next, van braces, rear braces, couters for your elbows. Each piece restricts your range of motion just a bit more. Gauntlets, metal gloves that turned your hands into clumsy clubs. Good luck picking anything up. Good luck having any fine motor control. You could grip a sword, that was about it. And finally, the helmet, the piece that completed your transformation from human being into a walking metal statue. Your squire lowered it onto your head, and suddenly the world narrowed. Your vision cut down to whatever you could see through the visor slits. Your hearing is muffled, your breathing echoing inside the metal chamber of your own skull. The whole process took 15 to 30 minutes, and that was if everything went smoothly. If your squire was experienced, if none of the buckles stuck, if none of the straps broke. In battle conditions, with arrows falling, with enemies approaching, you dressed faster, sloppier, hoping nothing critical got missed. And once you were in, you were in. No quick bathroom breaks, no taking it off because you got too hot. You were committed. You were sealed inside your protection like a medieval astronaut in the world's worst spacesuit. So you're armored, you're mounted, you're ready for glorious combat. What actually happened in medieval battles was chaos wrapped in metal, wrapped in terror. Forget the choreographed sword fights from the movies. Real combat was short, brutal, and absolutely nothing like a duel. It was a crowd of armored men smashing into each other, trying to find gaps in the metal, trying to knock each other down, trying to survive long enough to see sunset. Your visibility was terrible. The visor slits gave you maybe 30% of normal vision. Peripheral awareness? Gone. You saw what was directly in front of you, and even that was limited. Like fighting with a cardboard box on your head with two narrow slots cut out. Knights got flanked constantly, blindsided, hit from angles they never saw coming because they literally couldn't turn their heads far enough to look. And the noise. Inside your helmet, every hit sounded like thunder. Someone hitting your armor with a weapon made your entire world ring. The metal amplified everything. Your helmet became a bell, and you were the clapper inside it, getting rattled with every impact. No wonder knights went deaf. The constant ringing, the constant impacts, the constant noise of metal on metal. Medieval tinnitus was just part of the job description. The fighting itself was exhausting. You swung your sword, and the armor made every movement slower, harder. You had to put your whole body into it. No quick strikes, no fancy flourishes, just brutal, powerful swings aimed at gaps in the enemy's armor. Because here's the thing, armor worked. It was really good at stopping blades. So knights didn't try to cut through armor. They tried to find the weak points, the gaps at the joints, the spot under the arm, the back of the knee, the visor, anywhere the metal didn't cover completely. Or they just tried to knock you down. Because a knight on the ground was a knight in trouble. The armor that protected you standing up became a death trap when you were horizontal. can't get up easily, can't defend yourself well, just a turtle on its back waiting for someone to finish the job. And the weapons evolved to deal with armor. Warhammers, maces, poleaxes, weapons designed to break bones through the metal, to cave in helmets, to deliver concussive force that the armor couldn't stop. Getting hit felt like being in a car accident. The armor stopped the weapon from cutting you, sure, but it didn't stop the force. That still transferred into your body, into your bones, your organs. Your brain rattles around in your skull. Knights got concussions constantly, broken ribs, internal bleeding. The armor kept them alive, but didn't keep them uninjured. They walked away from battles bruised, battered, and damaged in ways that wouldn't become apparent until later. And when you did get injured, there was no anesthesia. None. Zero. Definitely none. The medieval version of surgery was held still while someone cuts into you with unwashed tools. Bite down on this leather strap. Try not to pass out from the pain. Good luck. Arrow wounds were common, and arrows were designed to stick. They had barbs that were caught in flesh and armor. Removing them meant cutting deeper, widening the wound, sometimes breaking off the shaft and pushing the arrowhead through the other side of your body, because pulling it back out would do more damage, all while you were conscious, screaming, held down by other men who told you to stop being dramatic. Broken bones were set by feel. The medieval doctor grabbed your arm or leg, pulled until things roughly lined up, then splinted it and hoped for the best. No x-rays, no way to know if they got it right. You just waited to see if you healed straight or crooked. Infections were the real killer. Most knights who died from battle injuries didn't die from the wound itself. They died days or weeks later when the cut got infected and fever set in. Because nobody washed their hands. Nobody understood germs. The same tools used on the last patient were used on you, dried blood and all. Amputations happened without painkillers. They heated up a saw or a blade, cut through your limb as fast as possible, then cauterized the stump with a red-hot iron to stop the bleeding. The smell was biblical, burning meat and hair and skin, and you were awake for all of it. Some knights begged to be killed rather than go through amputation, not because they couldn't live without a limb, because the process of removing it was so horrific that death seemed preferable. And if you survived the surgery, you still had to survive the recovery, lying in a bed, feverish, hoping the wound didn't go septic. No antibiotics, no morphine, just prayer and hope and whatever herbal remedies someone thought might help. Spoiler, they usually didn't. Many knights were permanently damaged by their first real battle, limping, scarred, missing fingers or eyes or ears. The lucky ones died quickly. The unlucky ones survived and had to keep fighting, keep wearing armor, keep pretending they were whole when they were held together by scar tissue and sheer stubborn pride. But let's say you survive combat. You're back home, time to relax, right? Wrong. Your horse needs care. Constant, expensive, never-ending care. A war horse wasn't just transportation. It was a highly trained athlete that cost as much as a luxury car and had the maintenance requirements of a Ferrari that eats. These animals were bred for size, strength, and temperament. They had to be calm enough to not panic in battle, but aggressive enough to kick and bite enemies. Training a proper war horse took years, and if you bought one already trained, you paid accordingly. We're talking $15,000 to $30,000 in modern money for one horse. And that horse needed food, lots of it. A war horse ate about 30 pounds of food per day. Grain, hay, supplements, the medieval equivalent of premium fuel. You couldn't just let it graze in a field like a peasant's plow horse. It needed a specialized diet to maintain its size and strength. Then there was the stable. The groom cares for it, the farrier to shoe it, the veterinarian treated it when it got sick or injured, which happened constantly because horses are fragile despite their size. Colic, lameness, respiratory infections, hoof problems. Horses found new and creative ways to be expensive medical disasters on a regular basis. And you couldn't just get a new one. These animals were investments. Losing a war horse was a financial catastrophe. Some knights owned multiple horses. You needed at least two, one for battle, one for travel, plus maybe a pack horse for your equipment, because your war horse couldn't carry both you and full armor and all your supplies. The medieval version of owning multiple vehicles, except the vehicles had opinions and sometimes kicked you. And the tack, the saddle, the bridle, the barding if you wanted to armor your horse too, which made sense but also made your horse even more expensive and difficult to maintain. Everything about knighthood was a money pit, a constant drain on resources. You weren't just maintaining yourself, you were maintaining an entire operation. The armor, the weapons, the horses, the servants, all of it constantly requires money you might not have. Speaking of maintenance, your armor needed constant care. Metal rusts, metal gets damaged, metal needs cleaning, oiling, adjusting, repairing. The medieval version of car maintenance, except you couldn't take it to Jiffy Lube. After every use, your armor had to be cleaned, every piece inspected for damage, dents beaten out, straps checked, buckles tested. The whole suit was wiped down with oil to prevent rust. This wasn't a quick process. It took hours. Usually your squire did it. But if you didn't have a squire, or you were between squires, congratulations. You were spending your evening polishing metal by candlelight, like the world's saddest janitor. And the smell, oil and metal and sweat and whatever bodily fluids had accumulated inside the armor during combat. The smell was distinctive, pungent, the kind of smell that stuck in enclosed spaces and made everyone know when a knight had entered the room. Your weapons needed maintenance too. Swords dulled, edges chipped, blades bent. You needed a whetstone, time, and skill to keep your weapons functional. Or you needed to pay someone else to do it, which cost money you might not have. The padding inside your armor rotted. It absorbed sweat, blood, and moisture until it became a bacterial playground. You had to replace it regularly, which meant buying new fabric, new stuffing, paying someone to sew it all together in the right configuration. Some pieces of armor wore out faster than others. Gauntlets and sabatons took the most abuse. Joints and connection points stressed and weakened. You were constantly replacing parts, repairing sections, trying to keep a 50-pound puzzle of metal pieces functioning properly. And if you couldn't afford maintenance, your armor degraded. Rust spots appeared, weak points developed, straps frayed. Eventually, you were wearing protection that didn't protect and hoping nobody noticed during the next battle. Let's talk about what nobody mentions in the stories: the hygiene situation, or rather, the complete lack thereof. You wore armor for hours, sometimes all day during tournaments or campaigns, and that armor didn't breathe. It was a metal oven that trapped heat and moisture against your body. You sweated, profusely, constantly. Medieval humans didn't sweat less than modern ones. They just accepted it as inevitable. But in armor, that sweat had nowhere to go. It soaked into your arming clothes, dripped down your body, pooled in the low spots of your armor. By the end of a day in full plate, you were marinating in your own fluids. The smell was indescribable. Sweat, yes, but also the metallic tang of armor, the animal smell of leather and horsehair padding, and whatever else your body decided to produce during hours of stress and exertion. And you couldn't bathe while wearing armor, obviously. So if you were on campaign, you might wear the same sweat-soaked arming clothes for days, weeks, until they were crusty with salt and grime and whatever medieval knights were made of on the inside. No deodorant, no body spray, no Febreze to spray on your armor after a long day of combat. Just the natural, unavoidable consequences of being a human in a metal box. Chafing was constant. The armor rubbed, the padding rubbed, metal edges caught skin. After a day in armor, you had raw spots everywhere. Your neck, your thighs, under your arms, places where the metal had worn through the padding and gone straight to flesh. Some knights developed permanent scars from armor chafing. calluses, rough patches of skin that never quite healed because they kept wearing the same armor that caused the damage in the first place. And then there was the bathroom situation. Remember, you couldn't just take the armor off for a quick break. If you needed to urinate during battle or a tournament, you had options. All of them are bad. Hold it, uncomfortable and eventually impossible. Go in your armor, humiliating and unsanitary, but sometimes necessary. Get help removing enough armor to handle business, then get help putting it back on. Time-consuming and vulnerable. There are medieval jokes about knights pissing in their armor. They're jokes because it was so common it became funny. The medieval version of laughing at shared trauma. And speaking of heat, let's be very clear about what armor did to your body temperature. In summer, armor was a death trap. The metal absorbed heat from the sun. The padding trapped heat against your body. You were essentially wearing a greenhouse that slowly cooked you from the outside in. Inside a closed helmet on a sunny day, temperatures could reach 130 degrees Fahrenheit. You were breathing hot, recycled air that had already passed through your lungs multiple times. The metal was hot to the touch. The padding was soaked with sweat. Knights passed out from heat exhaustion constantly. During tournaments, in battle, just standing around in formation, waiting for something to happen. The armor cooked them until they dropped. And when you passed out in armor, you didn't just fall down. You fell down while wearing 60 pounds of metal that trapped you in the position you landed in. If you fell face first, you might suffocate before anyone could turn you over and remove your helmet. Yes, this happened, more than you'd think. In winter, armor was freezing. Metal conducts temperature, so when it is cold outside, the armor sucks heat away from your body. You needed extra padding just to create some insulation between your skin and the metal that wanted to freeze you. Your hands and feet went numb first. The extremities always suffer most. And metal gauntlets and sabatons didn't help. They just trapped the cold against your skin until you couldn't feel your fingers or toes. Some knights got frostbite inside their armor, lost toes or fingers because the circulation got cut off by cold metal pressing against cold skin for too long. The temperature regulation problem had no good solution. You wore the armor. You dealt with the consequences. You suffered in silence because complaining was unbecoming of a knight. Character building, apparently. But the physical toll was just part of it. The psychological weight was just as heavy. Knights suffered from what we'd now call PTSD. They watched their friends die. They killed people up close, face to face, close enough to see their eyes. They lived with the constant knowledge that the next tournament or battle might cripple or kill them. And they had no framework for processing any of it. No therapy, no counseling, no language to explain that they were having nightmares or flashbacks or panic attacks. They just drank, mostly, the medieval version of self-medication. The pressure to maintain the knightly ideal was crushing. You had to be brave, strong, honorable, unflinching in the face of death. Any sign of fear or hesitation marked you as weak, and weakness in a knight was shameful. So they bottled it up. They pretended. They put on the armor and the persona and played the role everyone expected, even when they were falling apart inside. Some knights became brutal. The violence warped them. They stopped seeing enemies as people and started seeing them as problems to solve with force. They carried that brutality home, where it leaked out in how they treated servants, family, anyone they perceived as beneath them. Others became withdrawn, haunted. They'd survived things that should have killed them, and they couldn't understand why they were still alive when better men had died. Survivor's guilt, medieval edition. And the younger knights, the ones just starting out, had to watch the older knights and wonder if that's what they'd become. Scarred, damaged, hollow men playing at nobility while their bodies and minds broke down piece by piece. There was no glory in it, not really. Just survival. Just making it through one more day in armor, one more fight, One more year of trying to live up to an ideal that was slowly destroying everyone who attempted it. And let's talk about the financial reality, because this might be the most brutal part of all. Being a knight was ruinously expensive. We've mentioned the armor cost, the horse cost, the weapon cost, but that was just the beginning. You needed land to generate income. But land required management, workers, and infrastructure. And if you were off fighting, you weren't managing your land. It declined. Production dropped. Income suffered. You needed servants, squires, grooms, cooks, servants to maintain your household. Each one required food, shelter, and some form of payment. The medieval version of payroll, and it never stopped. Tournaments cost money to enter. You had to travel to them, which meant feeding and housing your entire entourage. You had to pay registration fees. And if you lost, if your armor got damaged, if your horse got injured, you paid for all of that too. Some knights bankrupted their families, maintaining the appearance of wealth and status. They went into debt, borrowed money they couldn't pay back, lost land to creditors, watched their entire legacy crumble under the weight of being what everyone expected a knight to be. And if you weren't born into wealth, if you earned your knighthood through service, good luck. You were starting from scratch, trying to compete with men who had generational wealth and family armor and established estates. You were driving a Honda Civic to a Porsche dealership and trying to fit in. Many knights died poor. Their estates sold off to pay debts. Their armor pawned. Their horses were claimed by creditors. The gleaming symbol of nobility reduced to a cautionary tale about living beyond your means in pursuit of an impossible ideal. The church didn't help. Knights were expected to be pious, generous, charitable, to donate to monasteries and churches, to fund religious causes, all while barely keeping their own households afloat. And God forbid you got injured seriously enough that you couldn't fight anymore, because fighting was your income source. Tournaments had prize money. Ransoming captured nobles was lucrative. Military service paid. But if you were too injured to participate, that income disappeared. You became a burden, a has-been, a knight without the ability to knight. And you still needed to eat, to house your family, to maintain some shred of dignity. Some former knights ended up as guards, as trainers, as advisors to younger knights. The medieval version of retirement, except you retired because your body broke, not because you wanted to.
So let's zoom out and talk about the gap between the legend and the reality. Hollywood shows you knights as heroes, brave, strong, righteous warriors who fought for honor and protected the weak. The reality? Knights were the medieval 1%, the wealthy elite, the ones who could afford to be professional warriors because they had the land and money to support it. They fought for their lords, not for justice. They fought for land, for plunder, for ransom money. They fought because that's what knights did, and not fighting meant losing status, losing respect, losing the identity they'd built their entire lives around. Were some knights honorable? Sure. Were some kind, generous, noble in spirit as well as title? Absolutely. But those were individuals, not the system. The system created men who were trained from childhood to see violence as glory and suffering as character building. The code of chivalry that everyone romanticizes, it was created after the fact. It was an attempt to control knights who were becoming too brutal, too unruly, too willing to use their military power for personal gain. It was more of a PR campaign than a reality. Real knights burned villages. They raped and pillaged. They held peasants hostage for ransom. They fought each other over petty disputes. They were humans with all the flaws humans have, except they had weapons, training, and social permission to be violent. The armor didn't make them heroes, it just made them expensive. The horses didn't make them noble, they just made them mobile. The training didn't make them virtuous, it just made them dangerous. And the whole system was built on the backs of peasants who produced the food, the metal, and the wealth that knights needed to maintain their lifestyle. The peasants who couldn't afford armor, who fought with farm tools when they fought at all, who died in greater numbers but aren't remembered because they weren't noble. Knights get the stories, the legends, the songs, because they were the ones who could afford to have their deeds recorded. They were the ones who mattered to the chroniclers and the church. But for every knight who did something memorable, there were 100 who lived, fought, and died in obscurity, who never got famous, who never did anything except try to survive in a metal box while the world slowly crushed them under the weight of expectations and expenses they could never quite meet. So yes, being a medieval knight was brutal. The training broke you as a child, the armor crushed you as an adult, the combat traumatized you, the injuries maimed you, the expenses bankrupted you, and the psychological toll followed you to your grave, assuming you lived long enough to have a natural death. For all the gleaming armor and noble horses and legendary tales, knights were just people. Scared, hurt, exhausted people trying to live up to an impossible ideal while encased in metal and debts and violence that never really ended. And somehow they kept doing it. Generation after generation of young men looked at the scarred, limping, half-deaf veterans and said, "Yes, I want that life." Because being a knight meant something. It meant status, respect, identity. It meant you mattered in a world where most people didn't. Even if it costs you everything. Even if it broke your body and your mind and your finances. Even if reality could never match the legend. So the next time you watch a movie with knights in shining armor charging heroically into battle, spare a thought for what that actually meant. The weight, the heat, the smell, the chafing, the debt, the injuries, the fear, the exhaustion, the slow, grinding toll of being a professional warrior in an era that had no idea how to care for the men it created. One sword swing, one lance charge, one expensive metal-covered heartbeat at a time. We begin with ancient philosophy, the timeless art of explaining why life is hard and what you can do about it when your toga smells like yesterday and your emperor might be insane. We're talking Stoics, Epicureans, and assorted Greeks who looked at the chaos of existence and said, "Let me write this down so people in 2,000 years can also feel called out." Turns out people have always been anxious, broke, and wondering if they're doing this whole being alive thing correctly. Spoiler alert, nobody was sure then either. Let's start with the Stoics, the original "it is what it is" crowd. They didn't invent emotional detachment, they branded it, like Apple for calmness, except instead of a sleek logo, you got a bearded man in a robe telling you that most of your problems are your own fault. Not unkindly, just factually. The core idea was simple. Some things are in your control, most things are not. Your job was to know the difference and stop screaming at the weather. The weather does not care, it never did. This philosophy has aged incredibly well, considering we still yell at traffic like it's listening. Stoicism says you control your thoughts, your actions, and your responses. That's it. You don't control your neighbor, your boss, the economy, whether it rains on your wedding, or whether the bread burns. You especially don't control other people's opinions, which is a relief because their opinions are frequently terrible and contradictory. The ancient version of "don't read the comments." Good news, this was freeing. If you can't control it, you can stop wasting energy on it. Bad news, you still had to live in Rome, where plagues happened, emperors went feral, and your best tunic got stolen by someone who probably needed it more than you. Philosophy doesn't stop theft, it just reframes your feelings about theft.
Marcus Aurelius, emperor, philosopher, tired man in expensive sandals. He ruled Rome from 161 to 180 AD, which means he managed an empire, fought wars on multiple fronts, dealt with a plague that killed millions, and still found time to write in a journal. His journal became Meditations. It was never meant for publication. It was Marcus talking to Marcus, trying to remind himself not to be a jerk when people were being jerks first. The entries read like a man who desperately wanted a vacation, but was also the HR department, military general, and customer service line for the entire Roman world. He wrote things like, "You have power over your mind, not outside events." Also, "The universe is changing, our life is what our thoughts make it." Solid advice, not easy advice. He woke up in palaces that smelled like marble dust, olive oil lamps, and the faint worry sweat of senators. Mornings meant decisions about grain supply, troop movements, and whether to trust the guy who smiled too much. No smartphone, no Excel sheet, and definitely no "I'll get back to you." Just stylus, wax tablet, and the knowledge that every choice rippled outward into thousands of lives. Congratulations! You were the most powerful man in the known world. The good news? You could afford good wine. The bad news? You couldn't stop thinking about death, duty, and the fact that one day you'd be dust and nobody would remember if you were kind. He was kind. History remembered. It still took 1,800 years for the book to become a bestseller. Timing is everything.
Epictetus. Former slave. Current legend. Born around 50 AD, he spent his early years as property. Someone owned him. Someone could sell him. Someone once broke his leg, either on purpose or through carelessness, depending on which ancient source you trust. Either way, Epictetus walked with a limp for the rest of his life, and never complained about it in writing, not once. He got freed eventually, taught philosophy in Rome until Emperor Domitian kicked all the philosophers out like a man cleaning his browser history before company arrives. Epictetus moved to Greece, opened a school, and spent decades teaching people how to not lose their minds when life was unkind. He was qualified. His big idea was the dichotomy of control, fancy name for a simple concept. Some things are up to you, your beliefs, your intentions, your desires, your actions. Everything else is not up to you. Your body, your reputation, your possessions, whether people like you. You can influence them, but you don't control them. Stop pretending you do. Stop grieving when they don't behave. This was the ancient version of "let it go," except Epictetus said it without a Disney soundtrack and more in the tone of a man who had been through it and knew exactly how hard you were working to control things you could not control. He didn't judge. He just pointed it out, like a friend who watches you wrestle a vending machine and quietly says, "That's not going to work." The Stoic trick was reframing, not denial, reframing. Let's say your cart breaks. Your immediate reaction is rage, inconvenience, the universe conspiring against you personally. A Stoic would pause and say, "I have a broken cart. That is a fact. What can I do about it?" Then they'd do that thing. Or accept they couldn't do anything and move on without the emotional fireworks. Modern therapy calls this cognitive reframing. Stoics called it wisdom. Same tool, different accents. Seneca, another Stoic heavyweight, once wrote that we suffer more in imagination than in reality. He was right. You've catastrophized a meeting that went fine. You've replayed an argument for 3 days that the other person forgot in 3 minutes. Your brain is a drama generator. Stoicism was the off switch, or at least the dimmer. Seneca lived from around 4 BC to 65 AD. He was a statesman, a playwright, and Nero's tutor, which is a bit like being a life coach for a toddler with a flamethrower and unlimited power. It did not end well. Nero eventually ordered Seneca to commit suicide. Seneca complied calmly, dictated letters while bleeding out, and reportedly chatted with friends about philosophy until he couldn't anymore. Stoicism in practice. Grim, admirable, deeply Roman. Good news, Seneca left behind essays about how to live well, manage time, and deal with anger that read like a proto-self-help book without the chapter on vision boards. Bad news, even the best philosophy cannot protect you from a paranoid evert with mommy issues. Sometimes the universe just picks you. Stoicism also loved memento mori. Remember, you will die. Not in a creepy way, in a clarifying way, like a deadline for a project called your life. If you remembered you were mortal, you'd waste less time on nonsense. You'd forgive faster. You'd say the kind thing now instead of later, because later might not show up.
Marcus Aurelius wrote that you could leave life right now. Let that determine what you do, say, and think. It sounds heavy. It was meant to be light. If this might be your last conversation, would you spend it complaining about traffic, or would you say something true? Most people pick traffic. Stoics wanted you to notice that and adjust. They also practiced negative visualization. Imagine losing the things you love. Not to be morbid, to appreciate them now. Your health, your family, your favorite cloak that doesn't smell like mildew yet. If you spend 5 minutes imagining life without them, you stop taking them for granted. The ancient version of a gratitude journal, but with more existential weight and fewer stickers. Modern people find this depressing. Stoics found it useful. When bad things actually happened, and they always did, you weren't blindsided. You'd already walked through that door in your mind. You knew which tools to grab. No Instagram quote was going to save you. But a philosophy that practiced hardship in advance? That had a chance. Now, the Epicureans. Different vibe, same goal. Epicurus was born around 341 BC on the island of Samos. He moved to Athens, bought a garden, and started a school that was basically a commune for philosophy nerds who wanted to talk about happiness while eating simple food. Vegetables, bread, cheese when they could afford it, and water. Occasionally wine, but Epicurus was not a party animal. He had a sensitive stomach and chronic pain. He chose his pleasures carefully. The big misconception is that Epicureans were hedonists. They were not. Hedonism is eat, drink, and ignore tomorrow. Epicureanism is choose pleasures that don't wreck you later. It's the difference between binge-watching a show until 4 a.m. and regretting your entire life versus watching 2 episodes and going to bed satisfied. Both are pleasurable, one is strategic. Epicurus said the goal of life was ataraxia, tranquility, freedom from fear and pain. Not eternal happiness, not bliss, just a calm, steady contentment where you're not terrified of gods, death, or your neighbor's opinion. A life where you have enough, you're surrounded by friends, and nobody's yelling. The garden was central, not a metaphor, an actual garden, a place where people grew food, sat in the shade, and discussed physics, friendship, and why thunder happens without blaming Zeus. The ancient version of a co-working space, except with fewer startups and more vegetables. Also, women and slaves were welcome, which was radical for ancient Athens. Epicurus didn't care about status. He cared about good conversation. Epicurean physics was atomic theory. Literally. Epicurus taught that everything was made of atoms and void, tiny, indivisible particles bouncing around in empty space, forming everything you see. No gods required for daily operations. Gods existed, sure, but they were off in their own realm, not caring about humans. They weren't watching you. They weren't punishing you. They were on permanent vacation. This was freeing. Most Greeks lived in fear of divine retribution. Did I anger Poseidon? Is this plague from Apollo? Will Zeus fry me for existing wrong? Epicurus said no. The universe is material. Causes are natural. Lightning is weather, not wrath. You can stop sacrificing goats to fix your crops and start learning about soil. Death was also physical. When you die, your atoms scatter. There's no afterlife, no judgment, no punishment. You simply cease to be, the same way you weren't anything before you were born. This sounds dark. Epicurus thought it was comforting. If there's no afterlife, there's nothing to fear. Death is not an experience. You can't suffer from it. It's just the off switch. Modern existentialists would not. Ancient Greeks had mixed feelings. Some found it liberating. Others thought Epicurus was a lunatic who ruined all the fun of believing in an afterlife with harps or rivers of fire. Epicurus didn't mind. He had his garden, his friends, and his philosophy. He wasn't trying to recruit. He was trying to live well. Friendship was everything to Epicureans. Not networking, not let's grab coffee sometime and never follow up. Real, deep, committed friendship. The kind where people show up when you're sick, share their last loaf, and don't post about it for clout.
Epicurus believed friendship was one of the greatest pleasures. It made life safe, joyful, and bearable. The garden community ate together. Simple meals: bread, olives, sometimes lentils. The smell of wood smoke from the cooking fire, herbs drying on hooks, and warm stone in the afternoon sun. No banquet halls, no exotic imports, and definitely no Michelin stars. Just food that filled you and people who knew your name. They talked for hours. About physics, yes, but also about fear, loss, how to manage pain, and what makes a good life. The ancient version of group therapy, except the therapist was a guy with stomach issues who thought atoms explained everything. He wasn't wrong about the atoms. The therapy part worked too. Good news, this lifestyle was cheap. You didn't need money for Epicurean happiness. You needed enough food, a safe place, and good people. Bad news, humans are complicated. Even in the garden, people argued, had bad days, and occasionally stormed off because someone said the wrong thing about determinism. Philosophy doesn't fix personality. It just gives you better arguments.
Pleasure came in layers. Epicurus ranked them. At the bottom, kinetic pleasures, the active ones: eating when you're hungry, drinking when you're thirsty, scratching an itch. These are great, but they require a prior pain. You can't enjoy eating unless you were hungry first. It's a cycle: pleasure, absence, need, pleasure again. At the top, catastatic pleasures, static ones, the absence of pain and disturbance. Not feeling hungry, not being thirsty, not itching, just existing comfortably without want. This sounds boring. Epicurus thought it was the best humans could do. A quiet evening with no emergencies is better than a feast that wrecks your stomach. Modern people chase kinetic pleasures, dopamine hits, new things, louder, faster, shinier. Then they crash and need more. Epicurus saw that trap 2,300 years ago and said, maybe just be okay. It's not exciting, it's not Instagrammable. It is, however, sustainable. He also warned about unnecessary desires. Natural and necessary, like food and shelter, you pursue. Natural but unnecessary, like gourmet meals and luxury, you can enjoy but don't depend on. Unnatural and unnecessary, like fame and power, you avoid. They're black holes. You pour yourself in and get nothing back but anxiety. The modern comparison is obvious. You need a phone for work. You don't need the newest phone. You definitely don't need a phone that costs more than rent and makes you feel inadequate 6 months later. Epicurus would have hated the tech industry, or loved it as a teaching example. Hard to say. Classical Greek philosophers had their own flavor. Pre-Stoic, pre-Epicurean, set in the table. Socrates walked around Athens asking annoying questions until someone got so irritated they made him drink hemlock. He never wrote anything down. Everything we know comes from Plato, his student, who may or may not have made half of it up. Socrates believed the unexamined life wasn't worth living. Also, he thought he had a little divine voice in his head that stopped him from doing dumb things. The ancient version of intrusive thoughts, but helpful. He was famously ugly, snub-nosed, bulging eyes, pot-bellied. He didn't care. He cared about truth, virtue, and whether people actually knew what they were talking about when they said words like justice or courage. Usually, they didn't. Socrates would politely dismantle their logic until they either learned something or got mad. Most got mad. His method, the Socratic method, is still used. Ask questions, poke holes, don't lecture. Let people realize their own contradictions. It's effective. It's also insufferable if you're the one being questioned. Imagine someone asking, "But what do you mean by good?" every time you try to make a point. You'd want to throw something. The Athenians threw a trial and a death sentence. Good news, Socrates faced execution calmly. He could have escaped. He chose not to. He drank the poison, chatted with friends about the soul, and died because he believed in following the law, even when it was unjust. Bad news, this sets an impossible standard. Most of us would flee. Socrates turned his death into a philosophy lecture. Overachiever. Plato, Socrates' star student, had thoughts about everything. He founded the Academy in Athens around 387 BC. It lasted 900 years. Think about that. 900 years of uninterrupted philosophy school. Your local university hasn't been around half that long and keeps changing the mascot. Plato believed in forms, the idea that there's a perfect, eternal version of every concept existing in some non-physical realm. You see a chair? It's an imperfect copy of the form of chair. You experience justice? It's a shadow of the form of justice. Sounds wild? It was the foundation of Western philosophy for centuries. He also thought philosophers should be kings, philosopher kings. People who loved wisdom so much they didn't want power, which is exactly why they should have it. Everyone else wants power for the wrong reasons. Philosophers would rule wisely, justly, and without ego. This has never been tried in practice because philosophers argue about definitions until the invading army gets bored and leaves. Plato wrote dialogues, conversations, mostly featuring Socrates, where ideas fought in real time. They read like plays. Characters interrupt, they make jokes, they get frustrated. It's the ancient version of a podcast, except written on papyrus and nobody got ad revenue. Just an influence that lasted millennia. Not a bad deal. Aristotle studied under Plato and then politely disagreed with almost everything. He didn't believe in Plato's forms. He thought reality was here, in the physical world, and you learned by observing it. He studied biology, physics, ethics, politics, poetry, and probably your mom if she stood still long enough. Aristotle categorized everything. He was the ancient version of someone who labels their spice drawer and feels powerful. His ethics were about virtue, not virtue as a rule, virtue as a habit. You become brave by practicing bravery. You become generous by practicing generosity. It's a muscle. You build it. The ancient version of fake it till you make it, except Aristotle called it habituation and wrote 10 books about it. He also believed in the golden mean. Virtue is the middle path between extremes. Courage is between cowardice and recklessness. Generosity is between stinginess and wastefulness. Every virtue has 2 vices, one on each side. You aim for the middle. Not exciting, very practical. Aristotle was the least dramatic philosopher, which is probably why he lived to old age instead of getting executed or exiled. He tutored Alexander the Great. Yes, that Alexander, the one who conquered most of the known world by age 30 and cried because there were no more worlds to conquer. Aristotle taught him ethics, politics, and philosophy. Alexander ignored most of it and focused on conquest. Must have been awkward at reunions. Cynics were the punk rockers of ancient philosophy. Diogenes of Sinope, the most famous cynic, lived in a barrel. Not as a stunt, as a lifestyle. He rejected wealth, status, and social norms. He walked around Athens in rags, carrying a stick, and occasionally masturbating in public because he thought shame was a social construct. The ancient version of performance art, except nobody clapped and everyone was uncomfortable. He believed humans needed very little to be happy. Food, water, shelter, maybe a cloak. Everything else was extra and made you weak. Luxury corrupted. Comfort makes you soft. So he lived with nothing, proving you could survive and even be content. Also proving that most people will avoid you if you smell like a barrel and have no filter. Alexander the Great visited Diogenes once, found him lying in the sun. Alexander said, "I am Alexander the Great. Ask me for anything." Diogenes said, "Move, you're blocking my light." Alexander reportedly loved this. He said if he weren't Alexander, he'd want to be Diogenes. Diogenes did not return the compliment. He didn't care about kings. Good news, cynicism was freeing. No possessions, no expectations, no pretending. Bad news, it was also extreme. Most people can't live in a barrel. Most people don't want to. Diogenes proved you could. He didn't prove you should. Philosophy as a dare. Let's talk about death. Every philosopher did. Socrates said death was either dreamless sleep, which is fine, or a journey to another place, which might be better. Either way, not scary. He drank the hemlock like he was trying a new tea.
unbothered. Epicurus said death is nothing to us. When we exist, death is not. When death is, we are not. You'll never experience being dead, so why worry? The logic is airtight. The emotions still argue. Humans are not rational about mortality. Philosophers knew this. They tried anyway. Stoics said death was natural, part of the process. Resisting it was like resisting winter, pointless. You can't stop the seasons. You can't stop aging. You can't bargain with biology, so accept it. Not in a depressed way, in a this is how things are way. When Marcus Aurelius wrote about death, it was always with a shrug. It's coming. Do good work until it does. Modern people avoid talking about death until it's unavoidable. We have entire industries designed to help us pretend aging isn't happening. The ancient philosophers talked about it constantly, not because they were morbid, because ignoring it made life smaller. If you remember you're mortal, you spend your time better. You say the thing, you make the call, you stop waiting for perfection. Application? Did any of this work? Yes and no. Stoicism helped people endure. Slaves like Epictetus found freedom in their minds when their bodies weren't free. Emperors like Marcus Aurelius stayed grounded when power could have corrupted them. Soldiers, merchants, and regular people used it to manage loss, pain, and the general chaos of existing in a world with plagues, wars, and bad weather. Epicureanism helped people find peace. The garden offered refuge. Simple living reduces anxiety. Friendship provided safety. For people living in uncertain times, which was everyone in the ancient world, having a philosophy that said enough is enough was revolutionary. You didn't need to climb, you could just be. But philosophy didn't stop the Roman Empire from collapsing. It didn't prevent wars. It didn't cure disease. It gave individuals tools. It couldn't fix systems.
That's still true. You can have the best mindset in the world and still live in a society with structural problems. Philosophy is personal. Politics is collective. Both matter. Neither is enough alone. The Stoics would tell you to control what you can and accept what you can't. The Epicureans would tell you to find your garden and protect your peace. The Cynics would tell you to need less and laugh at the rest. All of them would tell you to stop doom scrolling and go outside. They didn't have smartphones. They could see the problem anyway. Practical tools you can steal from dead philosophers. From the Stoics, Epicureanism worked for people with chronic pain and sensitive stomachs. It wasn't about having the perfect life. It was about finding contentment in the life you have. That's harder than it sounds. It's also more useful than chasing perfection. The philosophers weren't perfect. Seneca was rich and told people not to care about wealth. Aristotle owned slaves and wrote about ethics. Diogenes was insufferable. Marcus Aurelius preached kindness and also persecuted Christians. Nobody's clean. The ideas still hold. You don't have to live in a barrel. You don't have to die for your principles. You don't have to agree with everything. You just have to take what's useful and leave the rest. That's what philosophy is. Not a religion, not a rule book, a toolbox. Use what fits. So yes, ancient philosophers spent centuries figuring out how to live with uncertainty, mortality, and other people. They didn't have answers to everything. They had approaches. Some worked in a palace, some worked in a barrel, some worked in a garden with friends and simple food. For all their togas, beards, and outdated physics, they understood something we keep forgetting. You can't control the world. You can control your response. You can't avoid pain. You can avoid unnecessary suffering. You can't live forever. You can live well now. And somehow, their words survived. Copied by hand, translated across languages, printed in books, and now available on your phone while you wait for coffee. The same questions, the same struggles, the same stubborn hope that thinking clearly might help. So the next time you're spiraling about something outside your control, or chasing a pleasure that leaves you emptier, or forgetting that you're mortal and this day counts, maybe remember them. The bald guy in the barrel, the emperor with insomnia, the man with the sensitive stomach and the garden. One breath, one choice, one clear thought at a time. That's how you survive being human. Not with the perfect system, with philosophy that works on a Tuesday. In traffic, in grief, in joy, in the ordinary middle where most of life happens.